The Battle of Cold Harbor started on May 31st and went to June 12, 1864, 3 years after the Civil War began. It was just outside of the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. It was initiated partially because the North had grown weary of war, tired of the rising death toll. Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant's goal for the Battle of Cold Harbor was to cut General Robert E. Lee's supply lines from the Shenandoah Valley and from Richmond, as well as to isolate him from the Confederate capital. Grant knew he could do this if he could draw Lee out into an open battlefield and, by extending his left flank, cut Lee off from Richmond. This would, in theory, quickly bring an end to the war. On May 31st, the two armies skirmished at the strategic crossroads of Old Cold Harbor. It ended in a Yankee win. Grant, sensing that this could be the opportunity he had been hoping for, prepared for a major assault on Confederate lines. It was decided that Grant would make strategic decisions, communicate them to General Meade, and leave Meade to handle the tactical decisions required to carry out Grant's orders. Ultimately, no one would fully take control during the fighting, resulting in uncoordinated attacks with disastrous results. However, when Union reinforcements did not arrive on time, Grant postponed the attack for June 3rd, a day later than the original plan. This decision would prove to be fatal, one of many in a series of mistakes and misinformation that would lose them the battle. Because of the Union delay, Lee's army was able to reinforce his positions. On May 31st, only a couple of days earlier, Lee only had a small force of Confederates. Union soldiers knew that this attack would be costly. That evening, before the attack, many of them had written their names on slips of paper and sewed the slips to their uniform coats, a rudimentary form of dog tags, to keep from being buried as unknown. On the dark and foggy early morning of June 3rd, the attack began.
June 3rd, 2 brigades of infantry attacked across the field you see in the distance. Here is the letter home from one of them. The surface of the field seemed like a boiling cauldron from the incessant pattering and plowing of shot, which raised the dirt in geysers and spitting sands. Many of the terrible tales of Cold Harbor have their origin here. Men being shot down so rapidly that those in the rear of them thought they were lying down, and Union soldiers piling up bodies of dead comrades as emergency protection.
During the battle, all 5 Union corps formed a straight line about 7 miles long and advanced. The only coordination from higher command was the time of the advance, marked by a signal gun. During the attack, Union corps became separated by swamps and heavy vegetation, losing contact with one another. Each formation squared off with the Confederate fortifications directly in front of it, providing Lee with the advantage. Confederates were able to easily fire at the Union troops because of the angles at which Lee had arranged his lines. During the frontal assault on Confederate lines, nearly 7,000 Union casualties had occurred by the end of the first hour. By some accounts, most were lost in as little as 10 minutes. The situation did not improve as the Union offensive continued. As reports came into Meade, the confusion and utter lack of coordination of the attack became apparent. Union General Ambrose Burnside and General Warren were late in preparing for their attacks, and as a result were unsuccessful in preventing Lee from transferring men to the threatened area. Grant was able to take tactical control of the army back once his headquarters were moved into Meade's, and, after riding the lines, suspended the attack. Later in the afternoon, he renewed it, but there was no real advance. The following 9 days of trench warfare were miserable for both sides. As one soldier wrote in a letter home about the battle,
I was on the road most of the time till the 2nd of June, and then I joined my company and regiment, in which I have been under fire of the enemy ever since. The shot and shells come over our heads in all directions and all sides, and came very near to me once, head and shoulders, but did not happen to get a scratch as yet, but expected when I should to be fought. Last Friday night my regiment went in front to build breastworks, and after we had finished, we took our arms and stayed there until Saturday evening about 8 o'clock before we was relieved. It was rainy, but did not care for that. But there was some pretty hard fighting on both sides, for we was in front of all the rest, but not many hundred yards from the enemy.
On June 5th, Grant wrote to Lee to negotiate a truce, but tried to make it sound as though both sides needed it. Lee responded, saying that he had no casualties to retrieve. Finally, after Grant sent a message mentioning only his own wounded, Lee agreed. On June 7th, a 2-hour flag of truce was raised. By then, few of the wounded were found alive. Once the truce was over, the armies confronted each other on these lines until the night of June 12th, when Grant once again advanced by his left flank, marching to the James River. On June 14th, the 2nd Corps was ferried across the river at Wilcox Landing by transports. On June 15th, the rest of the army began crossing on a 2,200-foot-long pontoon bridge at Wayano. Abandoning the well-defended approaches to Richmond, Grant sought to shift his army quickly south of the river to threaten Petersburg. The Union Army had lost between 10,000 to 13,000 men over 12 days. This battle upped the Union casualty toll up to a total of around 52,000 since the beginning of May. Because of Grant's failure at the cost of thousands of lives, he earned the nickname the Fumbling Butcher, and the morale of the troops still under his command was lowered. Confederates called Cold Harbor the easiest victory of the war, though it would be Lee's last great victory. Less than a year later, Lee would surrender to Grant. Cold Harbor was Grant's worst defeat of the war. He wrote in his memoirs,
"I have always regretted that the last assault at Cold Harbor was ever made. No advantage whatever was gained to compensate for the heavy losses we sustained."
Interestingly, Grant told a very different story when he reported to the War Department on the end of June 3rd.
Our loss was not severe, nor do I suppose our enemy lost heavily.
This report was never updated. This statement has led to intense controversy among scholars, because some suggest that it is part of a cover-up involving Abraham Lincoln. Some speculate that this horrifying battle was minimized to help prevent any damage to Abe Lincoln's reputation. The Battle of Cold Harbor came 4 days before a Republican convention, delegates Lincoln desired on his side. The presidential elections of 1864 were only 4 months away, and shockingly, even the newspapers stoically against Lincoln published hardly anything on one of the North's bloodiest battles in the entire war. However, we will never know the complete truth behind some of the events surrounding Cold Harbor. It was a horrible battle and entirely preventable. Grant regretted that assault for the rest of his life. The number of deaths sustained by the Union Army were staggering. According to multiple sources, a diary, stained in blood, was found at the battlefield of Cold Harbor with a final entry. June 3rd, Cold Harbor. I was killed.